parents. They seem to be in such a major... Hello and welcome to the BMore podcast. I'm Erica Kane and I'm excited to be here with my guest today. The Asian Pasifika Arts Collective, or APAC, is a nonprofit organization that uses art to advocate representation of Asian Americans and Pacific Indigenous Americans in everyday life while building cross-community relationships. So today with me, spearheading the efforts of APAC, are two dynamic women that I'm happy to have here today, Ms. Catrece Tipon and Ms. Cori Dioquino. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you guys about APAC. Excited to let people know more about you two individually. But first, tell us about APAC, the mission, and what you have going on this year.
I'll let you go.
Oh, okay.
Go first. With that, you're so much better at it than I am.
Oh, with that. So APAC, I guess the best way to describe the mission is to just kind of talk a little bit about where we started. We started in 2018. It was just a small group of Asian American artists who were really tired of not having a say in the stories that were told about us and our communities. And so we started APAC kind of with this hopeful mission of just we want to give ourselves a platform to tell our own stories. And while we do that, also give other people a platform as well that they can use to tell their stories as well. And so really that's where that mission came from. And our vision for the organization is that for years to come, there will be a place where Asian Americans, whether they consider themselves artists or not, can continue to tell their stories through art with their own voices and with their own experiences. This year, we're taking it a little easy for the rest of the fall. We're actually planning a lot for 2024. We have a few events coming up in 2024, like our annual AAPI Voices that we've been doing. We're taking a little bit of a break this year.
Okay.
But yeah, we are mostly focusing on workshops, community events, trying to see if we can do more community offerings, because that's really our focus, is how can we bring the attention back to the community and how can we put that power back in their hands.
Okay. And, you know, when you say having a voice and having a say in telling your own stories, who do you feel was telling the stories?
Well, I mean, non-Asians, but mostly, I mean, from the theater perspective, I'll speak from that perspective because I'm a theater artist. It was mostly white writers, producers, directors. Those were usually the people who got control over which stories from the Asian community got produced in theaters or, got written, which was very frustrating. You know, a lot of people I don't think realize this, but a lot of the productions that you'll see that are popular now about any Asian community, a lot of them were written by white people and specifically white men. And so that was a lot of our frustration as Asian artists. And when we all got together, we realized it's not just in the theater community that this happens. It's pretty much across the board in every artistic practice. And
Absolutely.
so that was kind of this, I mean, sad but also wonderful realization of we're all going through this individually, so let's try to go through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. We have been seeing more films, not enough, more films with Asian actors being represented by Asian writers, but definitely more is needed.
Absolutely.
Just to take a look at your own personal stories and your connections to Baltimore and to Maryland, and then how you two came together to partner up and bring APAC together. So, Catrece, you're a talented photographer.
Yes.
Okay. But you're also saving lives on a regular basis. You're a nurse at University of Maryland's R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center?
Yes,
Okay.
I am. Currently working there still.
Yes. And now you were there working through the pandemic, or?
Yeah, so funny enough, when I started working at Shock Trauma, I actually just almost left my job at St. Agnes, one of the community hospitals also down in Baltimore. I started at January 2020.
Yeah.
And then March 2020 happened, and then everything shut down.
You just started January 2020.
I just started January 2020, and I was still just getting used to a whole new unit, a whole new way of working, and everything shut down. So basically, just us as nurses and trying to go through all of that and trying to learn the new system and the new hospital, all of it just went the wayside because everyone was back to square one.
Yeah.
There was one thing after another, and there was no way of catching up until it was too late.
Right.
And so that's why we're at this kind of imbalance in the healthcare system because everyone quit. Understandably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because with what support did we have?
Yeah, and I know this is a whole other topic of conversation, but yeah, the quality of healthcare has suffered since the pandemic, and we are still recovering as a country in that sense.
Yeah.
But now that folks are back out again and back acting a fool, I guess shock trauma's back in business, right?
Man, July 2020, everyone's like, I'm going crazy.
Yeah, they're outside. Okay,
It went from 0 to 100, 1,000 in like 0.5 seconds, and all my coworkers were like, I'm bored. I don't know what to do. I said, be careful.
Yeah, hold
because
on.
it's going to be
coming.
thrown up in our face, and it was thrown in our face.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have photography, you have shock trauma. These
Yes.
are two different ends of the spectrum, but they're two occupations that bring you in touch with people, which is like what APAC is all about.
Yes.
So explain kind of that, how in different ways they connect you with people, photography versus shock trauma.
It's interesting because I've been asked this before, but I never really had to think about it up until recently. I get to see the best side of people while still seeing the worst side of people.
Wow.
And understanding both of those sides and realizing, and it's allowed me to stay grounded because there isn't a veil on the reality of things. When you see both extremes, it just makes you appreciate what you already have in front of you and to continue to try and take care of what you have in front of you.
Absolutely.
Whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, your friends, your family, everyone in between, it just makes you appreciate everything that you have.
Yes.
And so I have the beauty of understanding both sides. I do. And I get to see the beauty of what humanity can be while still dealing with and continuing to understand how humanity can just kind of fall in an instant.
Absolutely.
And but that's a blessing because you need to understand both sides. You really do, because the idea of ignorance is bliss can only take you so far.
Yeah.
You have to understand your own truth, and you have to understand the truths around you as well. And that, for me, that's how I understand humanity as a whole, because I tend to see everything as a whole picture, and that's one of the biggest ways. So it's amazing. Both sides of it is amazing.
Yeah.
Good, bad, ugly, the whole thing. Because if I'm able to have you smile and make you feel like you haven't been before through a picture, I've done my job. I've literally done my job. At the same time, if you're telling me that you saved my life, I hear this every day. That's a powerful experience, And I'm not the most religious person, but I'm still a very spiritual person, and I take that stuff seriously.
Absolutely.
I don't take that for granted. And being raised by healthcare professionals, that was the one thing that they continued to remind me, is that it's not just about you. And so I take that to heart, and I continue to bring that to whoever I interact with. Because if I can make a difference in their lives, whether it's physically in their worst or emotionally and mentally at their best, I've done my job.
And you're being of service in both aspects.
Pretty much, yeah. And I love it. That's I believe that's my vocation in life, is to serve others in both extremes. Because somebody's got to do it.
So you were born in St. Louis?
I was born in St. Louis. I know, very random.
You were born in St. Louis, but grew up in Severna Park.
I did.
Okay.
Yes, which is weird.
So now growing up, and I'm going to take this quote that I pulled. It says, quote, and this is your quote,
Yeah.
I was always singled out. I was the brown kid. As a child of immigrants, you're always, unfortunately, trying to just assimilate and try to be a part of the majority. It wasn't until I went to high school in Baltimore City and met all these different cultures that all of a sudden I realized I'm in a safe space to be who I am.
Yeah.
So describe growing up in Severna Park. You didn't spend much time in St. Louis?
No, we spent 2 years. I was born in 93, and then we moved 95 into 96. So I was about 2 years, 2.5 years, because of my mother's new job. So she was a physical therapist, and they basically allowed her to travel and move to a different state. So they wanted to leave St. Louis for a lot of different reasons, and they were trying to pick places near to the ocean, to the water.
And they touched down in Maryland.
And they eventually picked Maryland, and I consider myself a Marylander. I have no recollection of St. Louis.
Right,
Missouri.
absolutely. I see.
Yeah, no recollection.
And growing up in Severna Park, for you to have that experience to say, okay, I finally made it to Baltimore City, but before coming to Baltimore City, what was your experience like as an Asian American growing up in Severna Park?
There's always this assumption with the AAPI community, especially when you're born of immigrants, you put your head down, you keep your head down, because you're just trying to assimilate, you're just trying to get by, you're trying to survive. It's all about survival. And that was unfortunately what I took to it growing up. I didn't appreciate my Asian heritage, my Filipino heritage at the time, because I was so busy trying to be like the majority. Because the people in Severna Park, it's the majority, and that's just the truth. It has gotten better, especially now. It's wonderful. I just wish I had that when I was growing up.
Right,
It was
of
never
course.
that. And I experienced racism from day one when I started school. It was those microaggressions which turned into physical altercations, which
Really?
turned to things being thrown at me, things being said about me. But when you're a teenager or a preteen especially, you're just trying to survive. You just want to be like everybody else. And so all I kept doing was pushing away what made me different. So every single time I went to the Philippines, I was the American kid. Why couldn't I be, my family was like, why couldn't I be like them? Well, when you're raised in an environment that's just wanting to, or trying to continue to single you out,
Right.
that's the last thing you want to do is appreciate who you physically are. Especially at that age. It's rough already at that age. And when you're just that brown kid, that's the last thing you want to be.
Yeah.
And so you deal with it, and you get through it. And then going to high school in Baltimore was an accident. I was actually supposed to go to like Mount DeSales or something like that.
Okay.
Which is again kind of more so.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I didn't get in.
Look at God.
Okay. But I didn't get in, and so the plan was that IND, and I'm so sad that school got closed down. That IND, or Institute of Notre Dame, at the time was doing rolling admission, and they were just kind of accepting a little bit of everybody. And my mom just did not want me to go to public school. That was just her thing.
Right, of course.
And so I went, but the goal was to transfer to St. Mary's down in Annapolis afterwards, because I would be closer.
Okay, that never happened.
My parents found out very quickly, and I found out very quickly that I found, I guess, for lack of a better term, I just found my people. It didn't matter what race anybody was, but what was amazing was that it was pretty half and half. It was white and black, and then sprinkles of different other cultures, which I never had the opportunity to experience when I was in Severna Park.
Right.
And so to have that
Diversity.
And to finally have that opportunity was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And they saw how happy I was, and so my parents made the sacrifice of, okay, we'll drive the 45 minutes to an hour every single day for 4 years.
Okay.
And they did.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that's one of the things I'm always grateful for, is that they made that sacrifice so that I could experience what it's like to be me.
Yeah.
And with other people of different cultures, and to appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you're in Severna Park, you're not feeling at home. You go visit the Philippines, you're not feeling at home.
see.
You're an American kid. Where can I feel at home and be myself?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get to Catholic University in D.C., you discover the Filipino Club.
I did.
Like, hey.
Oh, man. Yeah, that was also a pinnacle in my life as well. I really, really didn't start appreciating my own culture until I hit college.
Yeah.
I appreciated just who I was as an Asian.
But you're specifically
Yeah.
your own culture, the
Yeah.
Filipino club specifically. It's funny because sometimes you look at these clubs in school and you don't realize
Yes.
the importance or the
Yes.
impact,
Yeah.
you know, of having organizations like that. But it was pinnacle for you.
It was very pinnacle for me because I saw people who've dealt the same issues I was dealing with identity-wise.
Yeah.
And other traits in terms of being born a second generation Filipino American. Like, I found people that understood what the struggles that I was going through. And that was huge because now I felt comfortable exploring who I was as a Filipino and an American.
Yes.
While being with people who were literally going through the same exact thing as me.
Absolutely.
And not feeling that sense of loneliness anymore. Because
Yeah.
that was hard.
Yeah.
There was always, especially because I was an only kid. I'm an only kid. So there was always this, as much as I was surrounded by people that love me and care about me, there was always this sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
Of being just one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I when I had the opportunity to live in DC for 5 years and to interact with all these people, that was huge. That kind of, to be honest, thinking about it, that kind of set the stage of how I am with APAC, how I am with nursing, photography. It really kind of just set the stage for all of that.
Absolutely. So now you have this new sense of self, this new sense of pride, okay?
Yeah.
And now you make it back to Baltimore and you meet Cori. Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So now you two meet, and Cori, you have your own story because your upbringing, you were born in the Philippines,
yep.
okay? And you've lived in Hong Kong and the Philippines, correct? So tell us your story, especially before immigrating to the United States and after.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So I lived in Hong Kong, and this is just a really funny anecdote. When I was a kid, you know how like time is warped when you're a kid,
Yeah.
right? So it feels longer than it
Yeah.
really is. So I was going around for years, like as a child, being like, "Oh yeah, I lived in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for like 6 months, or maybe like it was a year, but it was like a while." And then I told my dad, I was like, "Yeah, right. We lived in Hong Kong for like almost a year." He was like, "What are you talking about? We lived in Hong Kong for a month." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "That's not." Nuh-uh.
What I remember, right?
Right. And I was like, really? That was just a month? And like, even in my brain, like even now, it just felt longer. And
Yeah.
it's just like so hilarious to me. I was like, you mean I've been living a lie this whole time?
It's real.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
real.
but it's so
Yeah.
funny because like I lived there, I think around the age of 3.
Okay.
And that's a very impressionable time period for a kid. And so even now, even whether it was a month or a year, I don't even care. Like I still consider Hong Kong very much like a second home.
Yeah.
I have so many like memories, like very specific images that are just
Wow.
like imprinted in my brain from
Yeah.
that experience. And
Even at 3.
yeah,
Yeah.
and when I went back, I think it was like 2014. It had been like decades at that point. I was walking around Hong Kong, and I'm like, "Yep, this feels pretty familiar."
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that when I went back to the Philippines, I had a very similar experience to Catrece, but unlike you, I think growing up in the States, I very much identified as Filipino. Because I'm like, I was born in the Philippines.
Right,
Like,
right.
I'm living in a foreign country. I don't care if I just swore my citizenship to the U.S. Like, I'm still Filipino.
Yeah.
And I hadn't gone back since I was 4. So at that point, I was like 30. So it was
Okay.
like 26 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, man, I'm going to go back home. And it's going to, I think in my brain, I thought I was going to fit in like a puzzle piece, that everything would just make sense. And I would just be like, yes, this is exactly what I was thinking I was missing in my life. And I went back and I was like, oh, this is weird. Like, I feel very out of place.
Really?
Like, it was just like, I was the American cousin.
Yeah.
And that kind of shocked me because I was like, whatever, I can still speak Tagalog and I still remember all of these things. And it was very like, no, you're the American cousin. So tell us what it's like to grow up in the
Yeah.
U.S. And I'm like, no, tell me what it's like to be in the Philippines because I
Yeah.
miss this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was I did a one-person show in March, and that was, the whole premise was the 3 major identity crises in my life.
Yeah.
And one was when I went back home to the Philippines, because I was like, oh, okay, so I'm not Filipino, but this entire time I didn't consider myself fully American, even though I had my citizenship. So what am I?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was also very much a confusing time. But I mean, I had that confusion pretty much my whole life. You know, even growing up in the States, I was always the single. I was also an only child. So Catrece and I feel like bonded because we had a lot of parallels in our life.
Yeah,
I was like,
we
you're only
did.
child? I was an
Yeah.
only child. You were raised by medical professionals? I was raised by medical professionals. So yeah, so we bond a lot over that. We joke around. It's like trauma bonding. But I'm like, let's talk
Trauma
about
bonding is real.
Let's talk about our own
Man,
child
I feel-
experiences growing up with Filipino parents.
Oh, man.
But I was always the singled one out. But I was transferred a lot to schools because, like Catrece, my parents did not want me going to public school.
Okay.
They really, it was partially about safety, but more that they just really wanted me to have a Christian education.
Okay.
And so they were constantly on the search for like the perfect Christian school. So I
Okay.
got transferred, I think, between 94 and 98. It was like James H. Harrison, 4C, Lanham. I went to 4 different schools.
And what time was this for you in terms of grades or what years were
So
these for you?
after 4th grade, I transferred to a school called 4C Memorial Christian School. I
Okay.
went there from 5th grade to 6th grade, and then in 1996, I transferred for 1 year to Lanham Christian Academy.
Okay.
And I only went there for 1 year, and then my parents eventually transferred me to Chapelgate Christian Academy, and that was 98. So that was like 4 different schools in 4 different years.
Okay.
And I finally stayed at Chapelgate. But in pretty much every single situation, because Lanham was predominantly black, 4C was predominantly white. Public school, I went to public school before that. It was a mixed bag. It was like half and half.
Okay.
With like a sprinkling of other brown folk
Yeah,
that
yeah.
were not black.
Right.
Yep.
But then I went to Chapelgate, and at the time, it was predominantly white.
Okay.
I've looked at their roster since, and there's a lot more Asians, and I'm a little jealous. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, like you said,
Okay,
it wasn't like
okay.
that was there, right?
What happened?
Goodness.
But regardless of wherever I was usually the only Filipino and the only immigrant kid. And the only time I had other Filipinos in my class was when I went to Lanham, and there were 4 of us, and I was like so elated. I was just like, yes, I'm not the only one. Let's just be friends. And that didn't happen.
It
No.
didn't happen. Isn't that the thing? Because look, slim pickings, right? And
Right.
then it's like,
Yeah.
personally, do we
Literally.
even
Right.
get along?
Literally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, 2 of them were in 8th grade, one was in 7th grade, and I just felt like they were all like they all fell into the popular crowd, and I was like, oh, that's not me.
Okay, okay.
No, it's interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because my best friend, who's Filipino, one of my best friends, we met in high school, and we bonded over the fact that we were both Filipino, and that was it. There was like in my class there was 3 Filipinos, me, her, and somebody else,
Yes.
and I was just like, okay, that's fine. Let's go. Let's it's worked out really
Yes.
well. You kind of right now it worked out. We ended up becoming best friends,
Right.
But not a lot of people have that. You basically bond over the fact that you share the same culture, but then
Right.
you start to realize where the personalities start.
Yeah,
to
you
lie.
still have to get to
yeah.
know them as people.
Yeah.
And what I started to find out was a lot of times I didn't always bond with other Filipinos because in my personal Filipino community that I grew up with, which consisted mainly of my mother's other Filipino nurse friends
Okay.
and then their children, most of them were born in the States. And so that was a very different experience.
Of course,
So
yeah.
I saw them as American. I think there was one family where all but one kid were immigrants. And they were born in the Philippines, but they, and this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, they were immigrating like one at a time. So
Okay.
like the mom was living in the States and was a nurse, and then she would go back to the Philippines, and then I think she was like petitioning for one family member to move
come over, right.
with her at a time until they were all here. So that's
Okay.
something that a lot of people don't talk about is like the separation that happens.
Yeah.
It's not a smooth experience for the majority of immigrants, and that was
all.
what happened with
Not
my
at all.
family.
Wow.
So a lot of the people that I grew up with didn't have those experiences of separation or immigration, and so those were my earliest memories.
Right.
Which can be kind of ostracizing. It can leave you feeling like you can't talk to anyone because who could possibly understand that experience of, oh, I was an immigrant too, and my
Yeah.
dad didn't immigrate for 5 years, and it was just me and my mom. So no one else had that experience. And so
Yeah.
it's hard to find your, so-called people when there's not a lot of people around you that have that.
Yeah,
So,
finding your tribe.
yeah.
You also attended Towson University?
I did.
So
yeah.
how was that for you?
Well, I went to Howard Community College for 3 years. I was just talking about this to someone. I actually didn't want to go to college right away. I wanted to take a break because me in school did not get. I was just not. I did not excel in school. I was like an average student, which was not okay for my parents.
Right, of course.
They're like, you should be exemplary.
Yeah.
And I was like barely getting by. But I really wanted to take a break from school because I was so burnt out. But my mother insisted because she was afraid I would never go back if I quit for a year. So I went to Howard Community College first, and it was a lot of just me trying to figure out who I even was and what I
Yeah.
even wanted to do. And then I started as a music major, realized that I don't like majoring in music, and started taking some theater classes just for fun. And that's when I transferred to Towson because they had a really good theater program. And I think both experiences were pretty similar in that, you know, there was more, I don't want to say it was more diverse. It was predominantly white. My class, anyway, was predominantly white. And so, you know, the two people that I did end up becoming really good friends with were both not white. They were both Latin American, and one of them, actually both of them, I'm still pretty cool with now. They've been like consistent people in my life. But I just now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I did kind of bond with the only two non-white people in my class. So, but yeah.
So you are a SAG-AFTRA actress.
Yes.
And, you know, we talk about the purpose of APAC, the Asian Pasifika Arts Collective, is to draw more attention to Asian American and Pacific Indigenous voices in the industry. So you being an actress and having that experience, you've starred or been featured in a Marvel Netflix series Daredevil and season 2 of New Amsterdam, right? The strike is underway.
Yes.
So that is a big thing that's happening right now because all of the performers are currently standing up for their rights. And with AI and everything approaching, like, you know, artists have to protect themselves now more than ever. So what is your take on the strike? I'll ask about that first, your take on the strike.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time coming, I really do feel. After the pandemic, you know, there were a lot of conversations about actors' rights, about, you know, residuals, because, you know, work stopped for everyone.
Yeah.
And for decades, residuals were the way that you were able to earn a living as an actor. And that was a big deal because what I don't think a lot of people realize is that I think a lot of people think, oh, well, you were just in a show for like 2 seconds. Why do you deserve residuals? And you know, our job goes beyond that.
Absolutely.
You know, it's auditioning, it's prepping for the audition, it's rehearsals, it's memorizing lines, you're on set for hours at a time, and sometimes you'll be on set for hours and then not even be called, and then you'll end up being on screen for maybe 2 seconds. But people don't realize how long that takes, how much work you're actually taking. And so residuals are actually a huge deal to actors. And, you know, everyone, regardless of what industry they choose, regardless of what profession they decide to go into, everyone deserves to earn a living from that. And so there are so many more things that happen behind the scenes as actors that people don't take into consideration.
Absolutely.
And so those residuals were really, really essential. They were very, very important to us being able to earn a living, being able to pay our rent, being able to say, I'm a working actor and feel proud of that. And it's also, there's, I think the issue also, they're talking about benefits as well. You know, right now, you have to earn a certain amount as a union member in order to qualify for benefits.
Right.
Most of us, like 95% of actors in the union, don't earn enough because residuals are not they're practically non-existent. I get paychecks where it's like, you earned a penny, and I'm just like, thanks. Feels good.
Yeah.
Most actors have multiple side gigs just to be able to support themselves and their dream of becoming an actor. But, you know, this is the United States of America, and you shouldn't have to beg to earn a living, especially when you work so hard. And the amount of training that actors go through just to entertain, quote unquote, people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. It's very, very difficult. And I always use the argument for people because a lot of people I've heard, a lot of people say like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. Like, it's not like you're saving lives. And it's like, really? Well, during the pandemic, what were you doing when you were stuck at home?
Yeah.
You were watching our shows on Netflix. You were watching our movies.
Yeah.
You were reading books that people wrote. Like, the way that you passed the time during a global pandemic was 100% reliant on the artists that created those things. But you're going to tell me that our work isn't essential at all?
Yeah.
And so, I really felt that during the pandemic, that this was a conversation that was starting to gear up.
Yeah, it was going to happen.
And once the strike happened, I was like, yep.
Yeah,
That sounds about right.
It was boiling over.
Yeah, and the issue with AI, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't even realize how big of an issue it was until they started talking about it, because they don't always talk. I mean, you don't always hear about what are the conversation pieces that are happening behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So to hear that production companies, producers want to use AI to replace actors and then take composites of our beings and create whole new people just to put in the backgrounds. I mean, it's really kind of terrifying, to be honest. And it's happening in every creative field, because my husband works in architecture, and he was saying, yeah, that's a conversation that's happening there too.
Wow, architecture. And you're like, how? What?
Yeah, it's apparently it's a conversation because, I don't want to say anything because it's not my field, but it's a conversation that they're having as well. And when I start looking into it more and more, pretty much every creative field at this point is threatened by artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
And that's very, very concerning.
They should be
it's
concerned
very concerning.
and afraid.
Yes.
But more proactive than anything.
Absolutely.
And that's why people are saying, listen, we have to step up now more than ever. Taking it back to the residuals, you hear about these 1 cent checks, these 36-cent checks that actors get. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of your favorite actors, and we're not necessarily talking about the A-list actors making big checks.
No one's worried about Chris Evans.
Yeah,
no one's worried about Captain America.
And really, kudos to the actors that have stepped up and donated and have lent their voice to the mission, and hopefully more will, that have stopped their projects to support actors. But a lot of your favorite actors that star in the TV series that you love and different things like that, those are the actors, the supporting actors that are, struggling and getting these small checks. And, those are the actors that you're fighting for. You want to continue to see those talented people work. So knowing that performers are fighting for this across the board, and then you as an Asian American performer, a Filipino American performer specifically, what are some of the challenges that you have faced beyond this, but just in terms of auditioning, booking, different things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a shift, I would say. I mean, last year when I auditioned, I was really, really excited to see that the majority of the auditions that I had last year were either for Asian American roles or Filipinos, specifically Filipinos. And that was really exciting for me to see. But I started acting in the early 2000s professionally, and it was not the case. I mean, the majority of roles that you would see for Asians were either Chinese or Japanese. I'm a brown Filipino. Like, it is hard to pass for East Asian. And so it was very, I know for me it was slim pickings unless the role was for any ethnicity.
And it's kind of disheartening when they kind of muddle all Asian, everything together as if it's all the same, and it's not the same.
And the any ethnicity was kind of this blanket statement for colorblind casting, because they just want to be able to say, we're just looking for the right actor for the role. And we don't, but, people don't account for implicit bias, You might say you're looking for any ethnicity, but that implicit bias is probably going to lean you towards that white actor or actress that comes in. And beyond that, I for myself, and I'm sure that a lot of people feel this way, it's not about I just want to be in a show or a movie or anything like that, but I want to be in something that feels meaningful, that, you know, tells a story that I can relate to, that's very specific to my experience as a Filipino.
Right.
And we need more of that because not every Filipino's experience is the same.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And, you know, you spread that across the Asian American diaspora. And of course, like, not every person's experience is going to be the same. And so for me, I was craving unique stories that I could relate to. And I think for me, that's probably what brought me to APAC, was because I realized there isn't a lot of power in being an actor, and especially when you're an underrepresented actor. And, you know, for me, co-founding something like APAC was more about taking that power back and taking ownership over my own story and saying, I want to be able to control the narrative. I want to be able to control the stories that we tell, and I want to be able to give some of that power, or give that power back to the rest of my community. So you know, as much of I always consider founding APAC kind of an accident for me. I'm not going to say for anyone else, but for me, it was kind of something that just serendipitously happened. But I feel like that serendipitous moment of all of us coming together and saying, let's do this, really opened a lot of doors for me. And not even just like as far as like opportunities go, but just creating those experiences for myself, experiences that I would have never had if I had just been sitting around waiting for somebody else to give me an opportunity or let me say what I needed to say. Like, that wouldn't have happened if I had just continued down that same trajectory. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah.
So you're a professional actress. You've had your experiences. You're a professional photographer and nurse, and you had your experiences. So how did you guys come together and meet?
Well, we
You
were
want me to-
meeting, you know, Rohit. Well, so on our end, some Asian American artists were coming together to meet, to really talk about just representation as a whole. And it was that meeting in Baltimore that I met you.
Yeah, so I had just graduated college, and I had just moved back with my parents, and I was like, this is great. I lost my community again. I felt pretty lost when I had to come back, essentially. So one of our mutual friends was like, well, I'm meeting up with a group of people of the API community talking about, you know, issues and so on and so forth. Do you want to come with me? I said, sure, I ain't got nothing else to do. Also studying for my boards. I literally didn't even have a job. I just needed to get out of the house.
Yeah.
Because all I've been doing was studying. So I said, sure, why not? I might as well. And so that's when I met the small group, and that's when I met Cori. You know, match made in heaven, clearly. So
Now, you know, these things start out with a lot of fuel, a lot of interest, a lot of great intention, right? It may start out with a big group, and then it may fizzle down to like the core. Because I
Oh
noticed
my
you
God.
mentioned that you guys met as a group, right?
Yeah.
But now it's the two of you. So how?
There's 5 of us now.
Oh, it's 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So are
Yes,
are the
5 of
5
us.
from this original group?
No.
Nope.
So it's two.
Okay.
So it's 2 co-executives. So both of us, and then it's our wonderful staff below us. So it's 5
Okay.
people total.
But it was the two of you that started
Yeah, we're the OGs.
APAC.
Oh geez.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
actually, originally it was more so her and our mutual friend that
Okay.
kind of just started rallying.
That's true.
Yeah, started rallying
Yeah.
people up. I kind of just
Give her a shout out. Who's that? Or him?
He's also an actor and he's a professor, Mohammed Ar-Suwaidi.
Okay. All right.
And he's of Singaporean descent.
Okay, nice.
So he had a lot of experience in producing, directing, acting, devising theater. He's a professor, and so
He helped kick APAC off.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I kind of looked at him as sort of like the mentor figure.
Okay.
Of the group, because he was the eldest of the group at the time, and so I know for me personally, I was looking to him a lot for guidance, for expertise, for wisdom, and I'm sure other people felt that way
Yeah.
too.
And for me, I was the only one that wasn't part of the Baltimore theater community, like at all. Even up to now, I'm still very much an outsider in that field.
Okay.
But I'm still an artist in others.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, but I
the
kind of,
arts.
yeah. And for whatever reason, and I always believe in, well, one, I believe in karma, and also I believe in kind of destiny. So something in me said, even though this isn't your field and whatnot, stay, see what happens. And usually I'm that type of person that if I'm going to start something, I'm going to finish it out to the end. I'm not gonna just quit halfway, stuff like that. So something in me was just saying stay. Now we obviously did not know that it was gonna turn into this whole thing, which is such a blessing. But yeah, it was definitely nerve-wracking because at the time I wasn't the best to relate to what they were going through because I was such an outsider. I knew him through another friend, and so, but I was kind of just along for the ride. I was perfectly fine being a follower at the time. But when things kind of started happening and people, got burned out. The first year, we realized, the first year we realized, oh my God, this was so needed, because as soon as they heard an organization comprised of AAPI artists, everyone was like scratching the surface, was trying to get to.
And you mentioned the term AAPI, if you could elaborate just for our
audience. So the AAPI means Asian American Pacific Islander Community. And so when they heard that there was an organization that was basically created out of nothing, all of a sudden people of that same community in Baltimore alone was coming out of the woodwork.
Right.
We didn't even know they existed in Baltimore. We thought they all left and went to Kingsville and Ellicott City, to be honest. Or Rockville, or St. Mary's, or like all of the other areas in Maryland that weren't Baltimore.
But Baltimore, you were finding your tribe. They were coming out the woodwork.
They were just showing up out of nowhere.
They were like, oh my God, like there were so many. I think the first big thing we did was the Charm City Night Market.
Yes.
And we had a booth.
That was our opening, essentially.
That was our big debut. And there were people that were signing our newsletter, which we didn't even have at the time. But we were like, sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of college students that were like, oh my God, I just started going to college here. And I was looking for an Asian organization. And there are none. And oh my God, I'm going to sign up.
Wow.
But yeah, so I think for, in retrospect, I think the reason why, and I definitely felt disheartened when we had the big group and then it slowly went down, smaller and smaller. And people kept telling us, like, no, that's about right. Like, that pretty much happens. But really also, I think when I look back on it, that burnout was so real because we grew so much so fast. And a lot of that, I realize now, was out of necessity. Like, people really were craving for that representation. And I think it was a matter of, and this is that scarcity mindset, right? When the opportunity comes, you say yes. You say yes to every single opportunity, and you don't take a moment to realize, oh, I need to take a break. I need to stop and think. I need to breathe. And we as a group were saying yes to everything. And, we had a very limited, on one hand, there was a lot of skills within the group. But then there were definitely some skills that the group as a whole were lacking that we needed, like fundraising. No one had any experience in fundraising or grant writing.
Marketing.
Nobody knew any of that because we were all just artists, just trying to live the dream.
Right.
And so there were just a lot of general skills that we were trying to pull together. And I think, when you're in a big group and you're growing so fast and there's a lot of skills that are needed and you're trying to figure out those skills on the go, and you're also doing these very big things, and you've only been around for, we weren't even around for 6 months when someone offered to collaborate with us on our first ever theater production. And we were so excited about it, but it was a very overwhelming experience for us. So I think that's where that burnout as a group really happened. And, also people moved on, I think a lot of us weren't expecting it was definitely not on my list of things to do to start an organization.
Right.
And so I think that was a general feeling for a lot of people. And then eventually it's like, well, I have to move on and I have to take this job here or go to grad school or do this. And so, there was a lot of one burnout, but also this isn't really fitting in with my overall life plan.
At this time.
And so I have to move on. And so I think at the end of the day, I'm glad that we were both able to stay. I think we gel very well together. But also, I think the universe really did kind of guide us in the right direction and made us small for a reason, because smaller is easier to manage. And when I'm looking back at it, the pandemic happened.
Of course.
And being a much smaller organization comprised of, at the time, 3 people, that is easier to manage in a global shutdown than if we were to be a huge organization with multiple people trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
And I honestly think that being a smaller group, being a small organization, there was less money to spend. We were able to pivot a lot faster. We were able to continue our programming on the whim. And we were just able to adjust. And I don't think that a lot of other larger organizations had the ability to do that in that pandemic.
Yeah.
Whereas we were just like, all right, what are we going to do? What are we going to do online?
The pandemic kind of became a blessing for us, honestly. So like she said, we got burned out really quickly. Everyone kind of just left on their own terms, and we were just like, okay, so what do we do now? All of our family members were like, no, just hold on for a second, and because this will happen.
Okay, it's good to have family
Yes,
encouragement.
we had a friend, Brian Gerardo, who literally was like trying to not. Basically taking us off the edge because we were like, okay, we're done. We tried. But
it was a good effort.
Okay, but he also had experience with his own organization at the time, and he kept saying to us, "This is going to happen."
Yeah.
There's just no way it wasn't,
especially
for how fast you guys grew, and so when COVID hit, all of a sudden. It gave us the opportunity to rebrand, rethink,
breathe,
and reset.
And so because of that, all of a sudden, oh, cool. So we don't have to leave our house. We don't have to leave our computers. So what can we make of that? So then we started doing something called the virtual art gallery because everyone was stuck at home anyway. And you see all these burgeoning artists who are coming out of undergrad, grad school, who have been in the industry for X amount of years.
Yeah.
Now let's use us as a resource to showcase their art. Like, how simple is that?
Yeah.
And online. It's not like they have to physically bring in their artwork, you know?
Right.
And social media, despite all its flaws, and there's a lot of them right now, it's still a good way to showcase them, to showcase their stuff,
Absolutely.
and to continue to give them the opportunity to give them a platform that no one else would ever give them, especially because they are API.
Yeah.
And that kind of jump-started the idea of let's continue to use APAC as a platform for artists to showcase their work, whatever medium they choose to do, whether it is painting, photography, singing, poetry, whatever it is. Let's try our best to give them that platform, because at the end of the day, as we have seen, even up to now, no one's giving us that table.
Yeah.
So let's create our own.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
And you've done that. And, your challenges, which are par for the course, that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have challenges. But also, it sounds like you've had your blessings as well. What about the partnerships? What partnerships came into play that were really pivotal in helping you guys move forward and stay on course?
Yeah.
I know that you guys are big on connecting with other communities, and your goal is to continue to connect with more communities moving forward.
Yeah, I think, we had such a strong online presence.
Yes.
And I think that was really our saving grace, is that for whatever reason, our online presence, our social media presence has always been kind of
The
like
constant.
Poppin', I guess. I don't know. Because
it's
whenever
been
we
consistent.
asked, whenever we asked people, how did you hear about us? They were like, oh, social media. And we're like,
Instagram,
"Oh, okay."
Facebook.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, so just keep on doing that. But yeah, and I think it also is because we're like the only Asian American organization that because I think there's also Asian Arts and Culture Center, but I think sometimes they have a little difficulty because they're tied to Towson University.
Okay.
So I think sometimes there's
Can't
a little
move as freely.
Yeah, and so, but I mean, and they do amazing work, and they've been one of our strongest supporters. We have worked together on a lot of things, and so we're very grateful to them. So we try to collaborate with them as often as possible, because they're also a small organization that's run by like two people.
people.
So we're like,
Yeah.
we get it.
We both kind of go parallel, hand in hand. They kind of do their own thing, and we kind of do ours. But
And sometimes we try to come together.
Yeah, we always try and come together because, us two are kind of the only API-based organizations,
arts organizations
that kind of exist in the city. And so
Yeah.
people have been clinging on to that as much as possible.
Yeah. And there's other like Asian-centered organizations, but I think we're the only two that really focuses on art and centering our mission on showcasing art. They're more visual art also. I think they try to do a lot of community stuff, which is really great. Actually, no, that's not true, because they do the Asian North Festival,
They do.
and that's actually pretty big. And we've collaborated with them on that too. But they've been one of our huge partners from the beginning,
Yes,
from
from the
like
beginning.
day one.
Yeah.
They've been so amazing in supporting our growth. And then the Motor House has been really big supporters from
always
the
been
beginning.
one,
They're
too.
always like, hey, whenever you want to do an event, like let us know. Like our
Okay.
doors are open to you. I think, especially after the pandemic, because we were doing so many things online, I think
Yeah.
our online presence grew. And it was actually through our friend Alex Palting, who now has her one woman. I gotta shout out to her. If anyone's going up to New York this weekend, because she's got her one woman show opening up at the She New York Festival.
Yes.
I think She NYC.
Okay.
But it was actually her who opened this door for us. She was in a show with someone at the Kennedy Center, or I think he was the director, I can't remember. But he works at the Kennedy Center. They were starting like community partnerships, and she pitched us, and she was also pitching her own one-person show. And that was through her. That's how our relationship with the Kennedy Center was able to take place.
Yes.
And so through them, we were able to collaborate and co-produce Alex's debut performance in her
Nice.
one-woman show called 0874. It's an amazing musical. She wrote it, and it's based on the 874 love letters that her grandparents wrote to each other during their
Wow.
immigration
Yeah.
experience.
amazing.
It's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
very beautiful. I dare someone to watch it and not cry. But she's doing a performance of that up in New York, and the Kennedy Center really helped us get that off the ground with her. They also opened their doors to have like a big community event, so we had like a networking kind of experience, and then they also provided the space for our AAPI Voices last year.
Yeah.
Which was huge. It was a really big deal. We were able to connect with the DC community, which, because we're Baltimore based, we don't often get that experience. So that was a
Yes,
really
yeah.
big deal for us. And then Guinness last year also, out of nowhere, were like, we want to donate money to you and
Nice. That's
support
always a good
you.
call
Yes.
to get.
Oh, you know.
Well, it was really
Yeah.
cool because they were doing, they were launching like a specialty beer that was inspired by bubble tea. And they really wanted to partner with an Asian organization. And
Nice.
so they were huge sponsors for pretty much all of our events last year.
Nice.
But yeah, I would say like them.
In terms
who
of
else?
in terms of other monetary sponsorships, Verizon,
Robert W. Deutsch
Robert
Foundation.
W. Deutsch Foundation, FILA,
yeah.
Baltimore Community Fund has been a constant resource
Yeah,
for
they've
us.
been amazing.
Amazing, and
Yeah.
also our fiscal sponsor, who we Fusion Partnerships based in Baltimore, that have helped us get off the ground.
Oh yeah.
They've been huge for us, just because we were and still kind of aren't in any position to be our own 501c3 just yet.
Okay.
But they have allowed us to make mistakes without getting into too much trouble.
Right.
I think it's also like us going to them for guidance too,
Yeah, my
because there's a lot of, one of the things that people don't, well, maybe not people, but me for certain, what was not anticipating all of the paperwork that goes into
Yes.
being an organization and having that fiscal sponsor there to be like, hey, like this is the paperwork you need to do X, Y, and Z things. That has been such a huge relief off of our shoulders, because otherwise I think I would be lost, to be honest. And so having that fiscal sponsor there to really back us up and give us that support and
Yeah.
just say, here's where all of the paperwork is that you
Yes.
need to be able to do this thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah,
and if
that's
you have
very
any
important.
questions,
Very.
let us know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I may be taking it back a bit, but tell me what the Unapologetically Asian campaign was about.
Oh, man. I almost forgot about that. So, yeah, Unapologetically Asian. So that was co-founded by my friends Diane Phelan And Jeremiah Abraham, they're both blowing up right now. Jeremiah Abraham is a producer. He's been involved in a lot of marketing and also producing a lot of Asian American films. Which I'm not at liberty to talk about because we're on strike.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then Diane Phelan, I believe, became the first Filipino Cinderella on Into the Woods.
Wow.
On Broadway. So, and then she toured. So they're both kind of, they're both killing it. But they were the masterminds behind Unapologetically Asian. And I met them in the pandemic, which was crazy because it was like and I credit Diane and Jeremiah for this. They really created this community of Asians through the internet, and we all came together, started Unapologetically Asian through their guidance. And the idea was just to empower Asians to tell their own stories, which very much aligns with APAC. We became, as an organization, kind of like a collaborator with them. And the idea was we would challenge everyone in the AAPI community to tell us how they are unapologetically Asian, and they would post like a minute-long video about what it means to them to be unapologetically Asian. And because Jeremiah is a producer, he was able to get a whole bunch of Asian American celebrities involved with it, which was amazing. But it really came out of the anti-Asian violence that became a big deal during the pandemic.
Yeah, it grew the anti-Asian violence, grew exponentially,
right?
Because of course, someone
Everyone
has to be blamed. Someone has to be blamed. So, unfortunately, that was happening literally at the same time, and so that. Unapologetically Asian was just another catalyst to help people understand that it's not our fault.
Yeah.
And also just to bring more awareness to Asian American issues, and one of the things that, it wasn't even just Unapologetically Asian, but pretty much every major AAPI organization or presence on the internet we're trying to say is, hey guys, anti-Asian violence isn't new. It's been happening since even before the founding of the United States. We just don't ever talk about it, and it's not included in the history books. And so it kind of became this opportunity for us to actually talk about Asian American history. And, all of those forgotten...
Real history.
Right? All of the forgotten things that, the history books strategically leave out. For a variety of reasons we won't get into because we probably don't have time. But yeah, so it really, it in that dark time, we found an opportunity to empower one another and to shed light on the things that we all experience as a community, as individuals. And it was, I thought it was very beautiful because then you see people sharing their 1-minute video about what it means to be unapologetically Asian. A lot of these really unique stories, these very moving stories would come out and be posted on Instagram about, people's experiences growing up an immigrant or being raised by immigrants or being second generation or just anything. And so, I feel very fortunate that we had the opportunity to be involved with that.
Well, I'm fortunate that you both were able to join me today to tell your stories, to tell us more about APAC, Catrece, and Cori. We just commend everything that you both have done through the organization. If folks want to learn more about APAC, if folks want to get involved, if they want to learn more about your goals for 2024, if they want to learn more about just whatever you have coming up, what's the best way to do that, to follow and log on?
Instagram.
But
our website is www.baltimoreapac.org.
Okay.
So our Instagram is Asian Pasifika Art.
Okay.
Pacifica is spelled with a K.
With a K.
Yes.
Pasifika.
So we are very active on our Instagram. If anybody wants to learn more and get involved with us in any of our future events, please don't hesitate to email either one of us. The email is also in our Instagram and in our website. As we continue to grow, we are slowly but surely able to bring in more people as much as we can because this organization has been such a blessing for both of us, and we want to continue to have it be a blessing for our community as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Catrece, Tipon, and Cori Dioquino from the Asian Pasifika Arts Collective, known as APAC as well. We just appreciate both for coming out. Continue to support. Make sure you log on and support. And I just appreciate you for joining me today. My name is Erica Kane. If you missed any of the episodes of the To Be More podcast, you can log on WMAR2news.com. Thanks for watching.